Imagine a sky so quiet, so still, that not even radar can find what moves through it, and yet, in that silence, a decision is made that could ignite a global fire. What happens when fear sees what the eye cannot, and trust is nowhere to be found? Let me tell you the story of one such moment, when an invisible aircraft, a divided past, and a single choice changed everything. The story of the American attack on the Iran B-2 aircraft in a calm, reflective style. Hello neighbor. Today, I want to tell you a story. It's a story that takes us high into the sky and deep into the hearts of two countries, the United States and Iran, a story filled with quiet decisions, loud consequences, and something that touches all of us, the fear of not knowing what comes next. Once upon a time, there was a plane, a dark, quiet shape in the sky, one that could barely be seen or heard. This wasn't just any aircraft. It was special, mysterious. It belonged to Iran, and some say it had been built in secret. Shaped in the image of something only one country had ever flown before. And on a clear, tense morning, that plane was seen. Or rather, it was almost not seen. High above international waters, near a space no one could agree upon, someone in a control room blinked. A radar blip appeared. Warnings echoed. Decisions had to be made quickly. The American side called for caution, but they were also afraid. They remembered the past, and fear, when it mixes with memory, can be a very dangerous thing. So, they launched. Not a conversation, not a question, but something sharp, fast, and final. A missile, cutting through the quiet morning, found the aircraft. And just like that, the shape was gone. But the story didn't end there. After the sky turned silent again, the world turned loud. Voices from all around asked, why? Why do we strike before we ask? Why do we fear before we understand? The people on both sides sat by their radios and screens, hoping for calm, aching for peace. And though the government spoke in sharp tones, the people spoke in soft ones. They wanted safety, yes, but also understanding. That day reminds us that the sky isn't just for warplanes and warnings. It's also a place for birds, for clouds, for hope, and it can be a space for peace if we learn to listen before we launch. So, the next time someone or something unfamiliar appears in your sky, maybe don't be the first to fire. Maybe be the first to wave. The beginning of the incident can be traced to a moment of rising geopolitical tension between the United States and Iran. In a region already known for strained relations and territorial disputes, both nations had increased surveillance, air patrols, and radar monitoring. During this climate, a unique aircraft was reportedly detected near restricted airspace, a plane with an unusually low radar signature, believed to be a stealth bomber. This immediately raised concern within the U.S. military defense systems, especially given that the only known operator of B-2 stealth bombers was the United States itself. The possibility that Iran might be flying a similar aircraft triggered immediate alarm. There was confusion and uncertainty. Was this a stolen or reverse-engineered model? Was it a decoy? Or was it something more dangerous? In situations like this, the margin for error becomes very small. Both countries had military forces on high alert, with intelligence analysts interpreting data in real time, trying to identify the nature of the object flying near sensitive zones. Some reports claimed the aircraft had veered into international airspace adjacent to a U.S. naval operation. This could be viewed as a provocation or a test. In the control rooms, radar operators watched as the unidentified stealth plane glided silently across their screens. Protocols were triggered, commanders were notified, and assumptions were made based on limited information. The aircraft, assumed to be hostile or a spy craft, became a potential threat that had to be dealt with swiftly. In such moments, there is very little room for open dialogue, especially when history has conditioned both sides to expect the worst. This atmosphere of distrust and rapid escalation led to what would later be known as the prelude to the American strike. Sparked not by confirmed aggression, but by the power of suspicion. At extremely high altitudes, where civilian aircraft rarely fly, The Iranian stealth plane entered a zone monitored closely by American surveillance. The aircraft's radar profile was minimal, which made its detection a rare and alarming event. Satellite tracking, airborne early warning systems, and naval radar arrays worked together to confirm the presence of something that shouldn't have been there. It was a high-altitude aircraft, flying steadily but silently, showing no signs of communication or transponder signals. That level of silence, combined with the stealth capabilities, made US officials fear that the aircraft was either a reconnaissance mission or possibly something more offensive. Fighter jets were scrambled to intercept and visually identify the object. But the aircraft's altitude and flight pattern made interception difficult. Every passing minute raised the risk of misjudgment. Within US operations centers, commanders monitored infrared signatures, electromagnetic emissions, and trajectory data to determine intent. The tension in those rooms was sharp. The Iranian aircraft's approach was slow but deliberate, and its path appeared to align with sensitive US naval movements in the region. Analysts debated whether this flight path was accidental or intentional. Meanwhile, electronic warfare teams attempted to jam or force communication but received no response. Iranian authorities provided no formal information about the mission, further heightening suspicion. The altitude of the craft placed it above many conventional anti-air systems, which required the use of specialized weaponry if an engagement became necessary. The entire scenario unfolded in a matter of minutes, but carried the weight of decades of mistrust. It was a confrontation not of voices, but of shadows, one side cloaked in silence, and the other surrounded by pressure. While the aircraft did not engage in any offensive behavior, its mere presence at that height and in that space was enough to activate the full machinery of American defense readiness. The confrontation became a live demonstration of how modern military powers rely heavily on advanced technology to respond to uncertain threats. The Iranian aircraft, believed to be modeled after or inspired by the American B-2 Spirit, utilized stealth technology designed to evade radar detection. It had a reduced heat signature, specialized body contours to scatter radar waves, and potentially radar-absorbent materials that made it extremely difficult to track using conventional systems. However, the United States possessed some of the most sophisticated tracking equipment in the world, utilizing space-based infrared systems, a WACS airborne warning and control system aircraft, and sea-based radar platforms. American forces managed to get a faint but persistent lock on the stealth aircraft's location. Signals intelligence units scanned for any communication signals, but the aircraft maintained complete radio silence. On the American side, artificial intelligence-powered threat detection systems processed the aircraft's movements, speed, and altitude in real time, comparing them to thousands of known flight profiles. The data was analyzed for hostile patterns, sudden altitude changes, proximity to naval assets, and route consistency with past attacks. Meanwhile, US fighter jets and drones equipped with long-range visual and infrared cameras attempted to identify markings or design features that could confirm the aircraft's origin. The American strike package, including fighters, was put on alert, and satellite communication linked regional commands with central military leadership. This level of technology didn't just make reaction possible, it made it incredibly fast. Within seconds, recommendations were made, launch protocols were reviewed, and decisions that once took hours were reduced to moments. The entire engagement became less about human judgment and more about algorithmic predictions. While machines handled tracking and threat analysis, human commanders were left with the decision to act on a target that barely appeared on screens based entirely on signals, heat trails, and silence. Inside the command centers, both on land and at sea, a heavy sense of urgency took over. The situation had reached the highest levels of military and political command within minutes. The aircraft's continued silence and proximity to sensitive US assets pushed the crisis to a tipping point. Intelligence officers briefed military leaders with real-time data, including radar images, flight path predictions, and possible threat scenarios. The presence of a stealth aircraft, potentially capable of carrying weapons, triggered immediate contingency planning. Various branches of the armed forces were looped in Air Force, Navy, cyber units, each responsible for their portion of the defensive net. As information flowed upwards, a command-level decision had to be made. The dilemma was clear: strike a potentially hostile aircraft that had violated key defense perimeters, or risk allowing it to complete its mission, whatever that may be. The room was filled with possibilities, not answers. Discussions included potential Iranian retaliation, the global diplomatic backlash, and the risk of escalating into a wider conflict. There was debate, but also pressure. Previous intelligence reports had warned of Iran developing advanced aerial capabilities, and the aircraft's design bore a close resemblance to American stealth technology. That resemblance alone made some believe it could be stolen or reverse engineered, turning it from a mystery into a threat. Ultimately, the order to engage was given, not by a single person, but through a chain of coordinated command approvals. A strike package was selected and released, targeting the aircraft at a precise altitude and trajectory. The decision was framed as a defensive necessity, based on threat assessment and national security protocol, yet in the quiet moments that followed the command, everyone in that room understood that something irreversible had just been set in motion. The launch was the result of pressure, suspicion, and the absence of trust between two long-wary nations. The immediate aftermath of the strike sent shockwaves through international diplomatic circles. Within hours, news agencies began reporting an unidentified aircraft being downed by U.S. forces, with speculation quickly centering on Iran. Iranian officials responded with sharp condemnation, calling the attack an act of unprovoked aggression, and demanding answers from the United Nations. Protests erupted in several cities, and emergency diplomatic channels were activated to prevent further escalation. In Washington, U.S. officials defended the strike as a necessary defensive measure, pointing to the aircraft's silence, proximity, and stealth as undeniable indicators of a threat. The Pentagon released limited imagery and sensor data to justify the action, but the lack of hard visual evidence led to intense global scrutiny. Allied nations were divided in response. Some supported the U.S. explanation, citing the right to defend strategic assets in volatile regions. Others expressed concern that the strike had been based on assumptions and fear rather than confirmed aggression. The United Nations Security Council called for an emergency meeting, where both Iranian and American ambassadors clashed in front of the world. Iran insisted the aircraft had been on a routine test flight, well within international airspace, while the U.S. argued it had no way to verify that due to Iran's refusal to communicate. Behind closed doors, intelligence agencies worked to recover and analyze debris from the aircraft. The origin and purpose of the stealth technology became the center of debate, whether it truly represented a new capability for Iran or was a misidentified object entirely. Meanwhile, both militaries elevated their alert levels. Diplomats rushed to prevent retaliation, while news channels covered the story non-stop, analyzing every angle. In many parts of the world, the strike raised fears of a larger regional conflict, proving how quickly one decision in the sky could ripple across the earth. The entire incident revealed more than just a military response. It exposed the deep fear, mistrust, and pride that often guide decisions between nations. The American strike was not solely the result of data or technology, but was heavily influenced by a long history of suspicion between the United States and Iran. Both sides had developed narratives about each other over decades, stories filled with betrayal, covert operations, sanctions, and standoffs. These narratives became filters through which every action was interpreted. A silent aircraft wasn't just a technical anomaly. It was a symbol of potential hostility. This mindset turned uncertainty into perceived threat and reaction into necessity. National pride also played a role. For the U.S., allowing an unidentified stealth aircraft to approach a strategic area without consequence would be seen as a failure to uphold security. For Iran, Operating such an aircraft, if proven true, would symbolize a leap in technological achievement and defiance against Western control. Neither side wanted to appear weak. That pressure influenced decisions at every level, from radar operators to top military officials. Even the language used in internal communications began to shift, focusing more on defense, deterrence, and control rather than verification, dialogue, or de-escalation. The absence of direct communication sealed the course of action. In a world where technology allows for immediate data transfer, voice contact still matters. But there were no open lines between the jet and the American forces. No signals, no warnings, only silence. That silence was filled with assumptions. Born from history, it was no longer just a planet, was a reflection of what each side feared the other had become. The strike, then, was less about that single aircraft, and more about two nations trapped in a pattern of mistrust, making choices shaped by shadows instead of truth. And so, in the sky, where silence met suspicion, a single decision echoed louder than the engines of any aircraft. It was not just about technology or defense, it was about the stories we carry, the fears we feed, and the pride we protect. The American attack on the Iranian stealth aircraft became more than a military act. It became a mirror reflecting how quickly history, when left unresolved, can shape our present. In a world connected by satellites and sensors, it is still the absence of trust that proves most dangerous. This story reminds us that the most powerful tools are not missiles or machines, but understanding, communication, and the courage to question before we strike.